Welcome back, everyone. I am so glad you could join me tonight. No matter where you are in the world, no matter what time of day or night it may be where you are, I truly hope you're doing well. I hope you're safe, and I hope you're feeling all right. For those of you who are new, what we do here is simple. The stories you're about to hear come from people just like you. They're submitted by listeners who have had experiences that they can't explain, experiences that have stayed with them. These aren't campfire tales made up for entertainment. They are first-hand accounts of events that have left a permanent mark on the people who lived through them. We don't push any conclusions here. We don't pretend to have the answers. We are simply a space for these stories to be told and to be heard. If you've had an experience of your own, something that has lingered in the back of your mind, something you feel you can't talk about with anyone else, my email address is in the description of this video. I read every single submission that comes through. And now it's time to get into it. For all the legends who have been here before, you know the drill. For anyone who is new, I invite you to join us. Grab a drink, lock your doors and your windows. Turn down the lights. Let's begin. The first story tonight comes to us from a man who wishes to remain anonymous. He writes, I grew up in the Appalachian Mountains. Not the gentle rolling hills you see in postcards, but the deep, rugged parts of West Virginia where the hollows have names, but the people who live in them don't much care for outsiders. My family has been on the same piece of land for over 100 years. It's a small farmstead tucked into a valley, with a creek running through it and mountains rising up on all sides like a fortress. Behind our property, there's a hollow. We just called it the Back Hollow. It's a steep, thickly wooded ravine that winds its way up into the higher peaks. It's not a place people go. The timber companies logged out the easier spots decades ago, but the hollow was too steep, too treacherous. So it was left alone. It's old growth in there, poplar trees as wide as a car, oaks that have been standing since before my great-grandfather was born. The ground is a tangled mess of rhododendron thickets, so dense you can't see 5 feet in front of you. As a kid, that hollow was my entire world. I knew every game trail, every rock outcropping, every twist and turn of the little stream that carved its way through the bottom. My dad taught me how to hunt and track in there. He taught me the sounds of the woods, the difference between a deer's cautious step and a bear's heavy shuffle. I felt more at home in that hollow than I did in our own house. It was my sanctuary. This happened when I was 27. I was living at home at the time, helping my dad with the farm after a stint in the city that just didn't take. I'd fallen back into my old routines, and one of my favorites was taking a late evening walk up into the hollow. It was a way to clear my head, to feel the quiet of the mountains settle over me. It was a cool evening in late September. The sun had just dipped below the western ridge, painting the sky in shades of orange and deep purple. That time of day, what some people call the gloaming, was always my favorite. The world gets quiet and still, holding its breath before the night comes. I told my dad I was heading out for a bit. He was on the porch, cleaning a rifle, and just nodded. It was so routine. It didn't even warrant a conversation. I grabbed a small flashlight, more out of habit than necessity, stuck it in my pocket, and headed out across the back pasture toward the tree line that marked the entrance to the hollow. The air was crisp, smelling of damp earth and decaying leaves. The usual chorus of crickets and katydids had started up, a familiar and comforting sound. I stepped into the woods, following a trail that was more a memory in my muscles than a visible path on the ground. The light under the canopy was already fading fast, the world turning into shades of gray and black. I walked for maybe 20 minutes, moving deeper and higher into the hollow. I wasn't going anywhere in particular, just walking. The sounds of the farm faded away behind me, replaced by the whisper of the wind in the treetops and the gurgle of the creek nearby. It was peaceful. It was exactly what I'd come out for. I found a large, flat rock overlooking a bend in the creek and sat down. This was a spot I'd been to 1,000 times. I could sit there for hours, just listening, watching the water flow over the mossy stones. I sat there as the last of the light bled from the sky, and the woods became truly dark. The moon wasn't up yet, so the only light was the faint glow from the stars filtering through the leaves. And then it happened. It wasn't a sound. It was the opposite of a sound. One moment, the air was filled with the symphony of the night woods, the crickets, the tree frogs, the distant call of a screech owl. The next moment, it was absolute total silence. It was so abrupt, it felt like a physical blow, like someone had thrown a switch and turned off the world. I've spent my entire life in the woods, and I know that silence. It's the silence that comes when a predator is near. Every small creature, every insect holds its breath, hoping not to be noticed. I froze on the rock, every nerve ending on fire. My heart started a slow, heavy drum against my ribs. I strained my ears, listening into the oppressive quiet. Nothing. Not a leaf rustle, not a cricket chirp. The only sound was the creek, and even that seemed muffled, distant. My first thought was a bear. We had black bears in the area, big ones. Maybe one was moving along the creek bed. That would be enough to silence the woods. I slowly, carefully scanned the darkness around me. I couldn't see anything, just the black trunks of trees and the deeper black of the shadows between them. Then the smell hit me. It wasn't a normal wood smell. It wasn't damp earth or rotting leaves. This was a foul, gag-inducing stench that rolled up the hollow on a slight breeze. It smelled like a pile of wet, matted dog fur that had been left to rot in the sun. But underneath that was something else, a coppery, metallic smell, like old blood, and something sour, like spoiled meat. It was so strong it made my eyes water. I pulled the collar of my shirt up over my nose. A dead animal, I told myself. A big one. Maybe a deer had fallen and died in the creek. That would explain the smell, but it wouldn't explain the silence. The silence felt active. It felt like something was holding its breath along with the rest of the forest. I stayed frozen on that rock for what felt like an eternity. Every instinct I had, every lesson my dad had ever taught me, was screaming at me to be still. Don't move, don't make a sound. You are not the biggest thing in these woods tonight. Then I heard a sound that made the blood in my veins turn to ice. From across the creek, maybe 50 yards away, in a dense rhododendron thicket, there was a loud snap. It wasn't the sound of a twig. It was the sound of a thick green branch being broken. Something heavy, something powerful. I've heard bears move through the woods. They crash and blunder. This wasn't that. This was a single, deliberate sound. A sound of immense strength, followed again by that chilling, absolute silence. My mind was racing, trying to put the pieces together. The silence, the smell, the sound. A bear. It had to be a bear, a really big bear. But something about it felt wrong. The deliberate nature of the sound, the way the silence persisted. It felt intelligent. I slowly reached into my pocket and pulled out my flashlight. It was a small, cheap plastic thing, but it was better than nothing. My hand was shaking so badly I could barely find the switch. I told myself to be calm. Panicking in the woods is the surest way to get hurt. I decided to get up and start heading back. Slowly. I wasn't going to run. Running is what prey does. I would just walk away, show that I wasn't a threat. I slid off the rock, my boots making a soft crunch on the gravelly ground. The sound was like a gunshot in the dead quiet. From the thicket across the creek, there was a low growl. It wasn't the huffing sound a bear makes. This was a deep, guttural rumble that vibrated in my chest, even from 50 yards away. It was a sound of pure predatory warning. That was it. My carefully constructed calm shattered into a million pieces. This was not a bear. I knew the sound of every animal in these mountains. I had never, ever heard a sound like that. My thumb finally found the switch on the flashlight. I clicked it on, the weak yellow beam cutting a pathetic cone into the overwhelming darkness. I swept the light across the creek, towards the thicket where the growl had come from. The beam landed on the rhododendron leaves, making them glisten. I couldn't see past them. The thicket was an impenetrable wall of dark green. But I could feel it. I could feel something in there, watching me. The intensity of its gaze was a physical pressure against my skin. I started backing away, keeping the light trained on the bushes. My feet stumbled on the uneven ground. "Easy," I whispered to myself, my voice a ragged, unfamiliar sound. "Just back away." I took another step back, and a branch scraped against my jacket. The sound was loud in the silence. In response, the rhododendron bushes began to shake violently. Not just a rustling, but a violent thrashing, as if something huge was pushing its way through. Branches were snapping, leaves were tearing, and then it stepped out. It emerged from the thicket and stepped into the shallow water of the creek. My flashlight beam found it, and my brain simply stopped working. I could not process what I was seeing. It was standing on two legs. It was bent over slightly, but even so, it was impossibly tall. Its head was nearly level with branches that I knew were a good 8 feet off the ground. The shoulders were immense, a solid wall of muscle wider than any man I'd ever seen. Its arms were long, shockingly long, with massive clawed hands that dangled almost to its knees. The whole thing was covered in coarse, matted, dark fur that looked black in my weak light. But the head, God, the head! It was the head of a wolf, a timber wolf, but bigger, more monstrous. It had a long, tapered snout, filled with teeth I could see even from that distance. Its ears were pointed and stood erect on top of its head, swiveling independently to catch every sound. And its eyes, they caught the beam of my flashlight and glowed with a sickening, fiery orange. like the embers of a dying fire. It stood there in the middle of the creek, water swirling around its powerful, digitigrade legs, legs that were bent like a dog's. It wasn't a man in a suit. The proportions were all wrong. The way it moved, the sheer presence of it, was utterly and completely animal, a predator. We stood there for a second that stretched into an eternity. Me, frozen in abject terror on the bank, and this thing, standing in the water, its glowing eyes locked onto mine. The foul stench of it was overwhelming now, a wave of rot and wet fur and blood that choked me. It raised its head slightly and sniffed the air. A low growl rumbled in its chest again. It took a step towards me. The water splashed around its leg. The movement was slow, deliberate, confident. It knew I was terrified. It knew I was helpless. That single step broke my paralysis. A jolt of pure primal adrenaline shot through me. My mind wasn't thinking in words anymore. It was just a single screaming command. Run! I turned and scrambled up the bank, away from the creek. I didn't look back. I just ran. I crashed through the underbrush, branches whipping at my face, thorns tearing at my clothes and skin. I dropped the flashlight. The world was plunged back into near total darkness. I could hear it behind me. It wasn't running. It was loping. A heavy rhythmic thump, 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 thump as it came up the bank after me. It was crashing through the woods with a terrifying ease, snapping branches as thick as my arm, as if they were twigs. The sound was getting closer. I ran with a desperation I have never known before or since. My lungs burned. My legs were screaming. I wasn't on a trail anymore. I was just running blindly through the dark, praying I wouldn't run into a tree or fall into a gully. The only light was the faint starlight, giving the trees the shape of towering, grasping monsters. The sounds behind me changed. The heavy loping was replaced by the sound of something massive, moving on 2 feet. A heavy, crashing footstep, then another. It was walking now. It was keeping pace with me effortlessly. I could hear its breathing, a low, guttural, wet sound, like a bellows. I risked a glance over my shoulder. In the gloom, I could see it, a hulking, dark shape, moving between the trees. It was gaining on me. It was so tall its head was above most of the undergrowth. I could see the silhouette of its pointed ears against the slightly lighter sky. A sob of pure terror escaped my throat. I pushed myself harder, my heart feeling like it was going to explode. The woods were a nightmare maze. I didn't know where I was. I had lost all sense of direction. The sanctuary of my childhood had become a death trap. Then I saw it, a faint break in the trees ahead, the edge of the pasture. Hope, raw and desperate, surged through me. I poured every last ounce of strength I had into a final, frantic sprint. I burst out of the tree line and into the open pasture. The air felt different. The oppressive weight of the woods was gone. I didn't stop. I ran across the uneven ground, my ankles twisting, stumbling, but never falling. My truck was parked near the old barn, a few hundred yards away. It seemed like miles. I could still hear it. It had stopped at the edge of the woods. I didn't dare look back to confirm. I just kept running, my eyes fixed on the dark shape of my truck. I reached the driver's side door, my hand shaking so violently I could barely get the key out of my pocket. I fumbled with the lock, the metallic click echoing in the night. I threw the door open, dove inside, and slammed it shut. I hit the lock button, the sound of the solenoids engaging feeling like the most final, beautiful sound in the world. I sat there for a second, hyperventilating, my whole body trembling. My chest was heaving, trying to suck in air. I was safe. I was in a steel box. It couldn't get me. My hand, slick with sweat, turned the key in the ignition. The old engine coughed and sputtered, then roared to life. The headlights flashed on, cutting a brilliant white path across the pasture and illuminating the tree line I had just emerged from. And it was standing there, right at the edge of the woods, partially hidden by the trunk of a massive oak tree. It was standing on its two hind legs again, perfectly still, watching me. The headlights caught it full on. The fur was dark brown and black, matted with mud and who knows what else. The muscle and sinew in its legs and arms were clearly visible. I could see the glint of its claws. It wasn't scared of the light. It didn't flinch from the sound of the engine. It just stood there, its head tilted slightly, its glowing orange eyes fixed on me. It was an expression of cold, calculating intelligence. There was no fear in it. There was no panic. There was just assessment. Then it did something that I will never, ever forget. It raised its long snout and let out a sound. It wasn't a growl. It wasn't a howl. It was a low, guttural, rumbling noise that sounded almost like a chuckle, a deep, menacing sound of amusement. Then, as slowly and deliberately as it had appeared, it turned. It took one step back, and the darkness of the hollow swallowed it whole. It was just gone. I didn't wait. I slammed the truck into reverse, spun it around in a spray of gravel and mud, and floored it. I drove up the farm lane at a speed that should have broken an axle, my eyes glued to the rearview mirror. But there was nothing, just the darkness. I burst into the house, wild-eyed and covered in scratches. My dad was still on the porch. He took one look at me and stood up, his face a mask of concern. "What in God's name happened to you?" I tried to tell him. The words came out in a jumbled, panicked torrent. The silence, the smell, the thing in the creek, the wolf head, the chase. He listened, his expression growing more and more grim. When I was done, gasping for breath, he was quiet for a long time. He looked past me, out toward the dark line of the mountains. "Son," he said, his voice low and steady, "you saw a bear. You got spooked in the dark. Your mind played tricks on you." "No," I said, my voice shaking. "Dad, no. This was not a bear. It stood on two legs. It had a wolf's head. It chased me." He put a heavy hand on my shoulder. "You're safe now. That's all that matters. Let's get you cleaned up. We're not going to talk about this again." And we didn't. But something changed in him that night. The next day, he went out and bought 2 high-powered motion sensor floodlights and installed them on the corners of the barn, pointing toward the hollow. He never said why. He just did it. And he started carrying a heavy-caliber revolver on his hip whenever he worked near the back of the property. I never went back into that hollow. I never will. The place that was my sanctuary is now a place of absolute terror in my mind. For months, I couldn't sleep without a light on. Every shadow in the corner of my room was the shape of its head. Every sound in the night was its footstep. I still live here, on this land. I have my own family now. But I never let my kids play near the tree line. When the sun starts to set, I call them inside. And sometimes, on a still night, when the wind is just right, I think I can smell it. That faint, foul scent of wet fur and old blood drifting down from the darkness of the hollow. I'm not writing this to convince anyone. I know what I saw. I know it wasn't a bear, and it wasn't a trick of the light. There is something in those mountains, something ancient and powerful and intelligent, and on that night it let me live. I don't know why. Maybe it was amused. Maybe it just wasn't hungry. But I know that I looked into its eyes, and what I saw was not an animal. It was a monster, and it is still out there. Our next story tonight is from a woman who has asked us to use the name Chloe. Chloe writes, I've always been drawn to wild places. The more remote, the better. For years, my passion was multi-day solo kayaking trips. There's a certain kind of peace you can only find when you're days away from the nearest road, with only the sound of your paddle and the flow of the river for company. I was experienced. I had top-of-the-line gear. I was a certified wilderness first responder, and I always respected the power of nature. I thought I was prepared for anything. I was wrong. This took place 5 years ago on a river system in the Pacific Northwest. It's a place I won't name because I don't want anyone trying to find what I found. It's a protected area, deep in a national forest, known for its pristine beauty and challenging rapids. I'd paddled sections of it before, but this was my first time attempting a specific 3-day solo journey through its most isolated canyon. The first day was perfect. Blue skies, clean water, the scent of pine and cedar filling the air. I saw a family of river otters and a bald eagle. It was everything I loved about being in the wilderness. I made camp on a sandy beach and fell asleep to the sound of the river, feeling completely at peace. The second day, the character of the river changed. The canyon walls grew steeper, taller, draped in ancient moss and ferns. The trees, massive Douglas fir and cedar, crowded the banks, their branches interlocking overhead in some places, creating a green tunnel. The sky was still visible, but the world felt closer, more enclosed. The water was faster here, demanding more of my attention. By late afternoon, I was starting to feel the burn in my shoulders and back. I began looking for a place to make camp for the night. According to my topographical map, there was a large gravel bar coming up on a sharp left-hand bend in the river. It was a spot I'd marked as a potential campsite during my planning. It was supposed to be wide, open, and safe from any potential flash floods. I rounded the bend, and there it was, exactly as the map had promised. A crescent-shaped bar of smooth, gray river stones, maybe 100 feet long and 50 feet wide at its center. The river flowed swiftly around its outer edge, but a small, calm eddy had formed on the inside curve, perfect for pulling my kayak ashore. On both sides of the river, the forest rose up like a solid wall, impossibly dense and dark. I pulled my kayak onto the gravel, the sound of the plastic hull scraping against the stones seeming loud in the quiet of the canyon. I stood up, stretched, and took a deep breath. The air here was heavy, humid, and still. The sun had already disappeared behind the high canyon walls, though the sky above was still bright. The light on the gravel bar was flat and gray, and that's when I felt it. It was a feeling that started in the base of my spine and spread outwards, a cold, prickling sensation that made every hair on my body stand on end. It was the ancient, instinctual feeling of being watched, of being prey. I've felt it before. Usually it's a cougar, and you catch a flicker of movement on a ridge, and the feeling passes. This was different. This was heavy, oppressive. It felt like a physical weight pressing down on me. I slowly turned in a full circle, scanning the tree line on my side of the river, then across the water to the opposite bank. The river was about 40 yards wide here. The forest on the other side was a dark, tangled mass of trees, ferns, and shadows. I saw nothing, no movement, no flicker of an animal's hide. I told myself I was just tired. The isolation was getting to me. It's common for solo travelers to feel a little paranoid. I shook my head, trying to dislodge the feeling, and started unpacking my gear. I set up my small, one-person tent in the center of the gravel bar, as far from the water and the trees as I could get. But the feeling wouldn't go away. It was a constant, unnerving pressure at the back of my neck. I felt exposed, stranded on this little island of rock in the middle of a vast, indifferent wilderness. As I was staking down the last corner of my tent, I heard a sound. It came from the opposite bank, the one I'd been staring at. It was a sharp, distinct click-clack. It sounded like someone knocking two smooth, heavy river stones together. But it wasn't random. It had a rhythm. Click-clack, click, click-clack. I froze, my hand on the tent stake. My mind raced. A person? Out here? It was possible, but highly unlikely. This area was permit only, and I knew I was the only one registered for this section of the river. Besides, the sound had a strange quality to it. It was wet, organic. It echoed in a way that stone on stone shouldn't. I stood up and yelled, "Hello! Is anyone there?" My voice sounded small, swallowed by the immense space of the canyon. The only answer was the rush of the river and the echo of my own words. And then the clicking started again. Click-clack, click-click-clack, a clear, deliberate response. A cold knot of fear tightened in my stomach. This wasn't right. I abandoned my tent and went back to my kayak, rummaging in my dry bag for my headlamp and my high-powered flashlight. The flashlight was a beast, a search and rescue model that could throw a beam a quarter mile. I switched it on, and the powerful white light cut through the deepening twilight like a laser. I aimed it across the river at the spot where I thought the sound had come from. The beam illuminated a wall of green foliage and dark, wet tree trunks. I swept the light back and forth, slowly, methodically. And then I saw them, 2 points of light. They were low to the ground, maybe 2 feet up, nestled in the deep shadows between 2 enormous fir trees. They were reflecting my light back at me. Eyes. My heart hammered against my ribs. Cougar, I thought. Or maybe a bear, but the eyes were too far apart for a cougar. And they had a strange color. Not the green-white of a cat or the dull red of a bear. They were a bright, piercing yellow-orange. I held the beam steady on the eyes, my knuckles white on the flashlight. "Get out of here!" I yelled, my voice trembling. "Go on, get!" The eyes didn't move. They just stared back at me, unblinking, unafraid. Then the most terrifying thing happened. The eyes began to rise. They didn't move forward or back. They just went straight up, 2 feet off the ground, then 3, 4, 5, 6. They kept going, 7, 8 feet. They stopped rising when they were a good 8 feet off the ground. My breath hitched in my throat. My mind refused to accept what my eyes were seeing. The beam of my flashlight was now illuminating not just the eyes, but the shape they belonged to. A figure was standing there, between the two fir trees. It had been crouched down, and now it had stood up to its full height. It was impossibly tall and thin, but not frail. It had a wiry, corded look to it, like a bundle of steel cables wrapped in muscle. It was covered in shaggy, matted fur the color of wet slate. Its arms were unnaturally long and slender, ending in hands with long, dark fingers that were curled slightly at its sides. But it was the legs that made my stomach clench with primal dread. They were bent backwards, like a dog's or a goat's, with a prominent, reversed knee joint. It was standing on two legs, but they were not human legs. I slowly raised the beam of light to its head, and a wave of nausea and terror washed over me. It was the long, narrow head of a canine, a wolf or a coyote, but stretched, distorted, made nightmarish. The snout was long and filled with teeth that I could see glinting in the light. The ears were pointed and alert on top of its skull. And the eyes, those terrifying, intelligent, glowing yellow eyes, were staring directly at me. They weren't just reflecting my light. They seemed to be generating their own malevolent glow. It just stood there, motionless, watching me from across the river. The clicking sound started again. Click, clack, click. It was coming from the creature. I realized it was snapping its jaws. A dry, threatening sound that promised violence. I was trapped, utterly and completely trapped. The river was too fast and deep to cross safely, especially in the dark. The forest behind me was a vertical wall of rock and impenetrable undergrowth. I was on a tiny, exposed patch of gravel, a perfect stage for whatever horror was about to unfold. I backed away slowly, never taking my eyes or the light off the creature. I stumbled back to my tent, my legs feeling like they were made of water. My mind was screaming, "This can't be real. This is a dream, a hallucination from exhaustion." But the cold dread in my gut, the smell of ozone and wet fur that now seemed to drift across the water, it was all too real. I got inside my tent, but I didn't zip it closed. I couldn't bear the thought of not being able to see. I sat with my back pressed against my dry bags, my knees drawn up to my chest. I had my camp hatchet in one hand and the flashlight in the other. The hatchet felt like a child's toy. I kept the beam trained on the spot where it stood. For an hour, it didn't move. It just stood there, a terrifying statue in the dark woods, its eyes glowing in my light. The sheer psychological pressure of it was immense. It was a battle of wills, and I was losing badly. Then it moved. It lowered its head, and with a horrifying, fluid motion, it dropped onto all fours. It moved out from between the trees, and I could see its full form. On four legs, it was still huge, like a Great Dane bred with a wolf and pumped full of steroids. It began to pace, back and forth, along the river's edge. Its movements were smooth, silent, and deeply predatory. I could hear its claws ticking on the rocks on the far bank. Every so often, it would stop, lift its head, and stare at me, the yellow eyes burning a hole in the darkness. Hours passed like this, me in my tent, a trembling mess. It, on the far bank, a relentless, pacing nightmare. The moon rose, casting a pale, ghostly light over the canyon, but the creature stayed in the shadows, just at the edge of the trees. At one point, around what must have been 2 a.m, the pacing stopped. I held my breath, straining my ears. I heard a loud splash. My blood ran cold. It was in the water. I gripped the hatchet tighter. my knuckles aching. I pointed the flashlight beam at the river, frantically sweeping it across the dark, churning surface. I saw nothing, no head, no wake. Then I heard splashing and movement on the far bank again. It had just gone for a drink, or it had faked entering the water to terrify me. The thought that it was intelligent enough to play mind games like that was somehow more frightening than a simple, brutish attack. It was enjoying this. It was savoring my fear. I didn't sleep. I couldn't. I sat there all night, a prisoner on my little gravel island, listening to the monster pace and growl and snap its teeth in the darkness. Just before dawn, when the sky began to lighten from black to a deep indigo, a sound split the air that I will carry with me to my grave. It was a howl. But it was no wolf howl. I've heard wolves howl. This was deeper, more guttural. It was filled with a resonant, primal power that seemed to shake the very stones I was sitting on. It was a sound of rage, of hunger, and of something ancient and utterly alien. It echoed up and down the canyon for what felt like a full minute, a declaration of ownership. This was its place. I was the intruder. As the first true light of dawn began to filter into the canyon, the pacing stopped. I waited, my ears ringing from the howl. Silence. I cautiously peered out of my tent. I swept the light across the far bank. It was gone. I didn't trust it. I waited until the sun was fully up, until the canyon was filled with bright morning light. The oppressive feeling of being watched was gone. The air felt clean again. I didn't even think. I moved on pure adrenaline. I scrambled out of my tent, grabbed my kayak, and threw my most essential gear into it, my wallet, my satellite phone, a water bottle. I left everything else, the tent, my sleeping bag, my stove, my food. I didn't care. I just had to get out of there. I pushed the kayak into the cold, fast-moving water. As I climbed in and grabbed my paddle, I took one last look at the opposite bank, and my heart stopped. It was there, standing in the exact same spot between the two fir trees. In the clear morning light, I could see it perfectly. The matted gray fur, the impossibly long limbs, the backward bent legs, the monstrous canine head. It was just a dark silhouette against the bright forest beyond, but it was unmistakable. It had been there the whole time, watching me, waiting. I dug my paddle into the water and pulled with all my might. The kayak shot out into the main current. As I was swept downstream, away from the gravel bar, it lifted its head and let out that same terrifying, soul-shaking howl, a sound of fury that I was escaping. I didn't look back again. I paddled for 10 straight hours. I didn't stop to eat. I didn't stop to rest. I shot through rapids that I should have portaged around. I was reckless, driven by a fear so profound it had become a physical fuel. My only thought was to put as much distance as possible between me and that river bend. When I finally reached the takeout point, hours ahead of schedule, I was a wreck. I was dehydrated, exhausted, and my hands were raw and blistered. The outfitter who was supposed to pick me up the next day wasn't there, of course. I had to use my satellite phone to call for an emergency pickup. To the Forest Service and the outfitter, I said I'd been stalked by a large, unusually aggressive black bear. It was the only explanation I could think of that wouldn't get me committed. They believed me. They even sent a ranger to retrieve my abandoned gear a week later. They reported back that the campsite had been torn to shreds. My tent was ripped to ribbons. My dry bags were torn open, their contents scattered. And there were, they said, unusual tracks all over the gravel bar. They were canine, but far too large for any known wolf, and the stride was all wrong. They classified it as a transient wolf and closed the file. I sold my kayak and all my camping gear. I haven't been on a river since. I haven't spent a night in a tent since. The wild places that I once loved now hold a deep and abiding terror for me. I know what I saw was not a bear or a wolf. It was something other, something that should not exist. It was intelligent, it was malevolent, and it was ancient. It let me go, but it took something from me that I can never get back. My belief that I was safe in the wilderness. Now I know the truth. We are not alone out there, and some places, deep in the heart of the wild, belong to things we can't even begin to comprehend. Our final story this evening is from a man who grew up on a farm in a part of the country where the winters are long and the nights are very, very dark. He writes, "My childhood home was a farm in central Wisconsin. It wasn't a massive corporate operation, just 150 acres of corn and dairy that had been in my family for 4 generations. Our property was an island of cleared land in a sea of forest. To the north, our fields ended abruptly at the border of a huge state forest, a dense and sprawling wilderness of pine, oak, and birch that went on for miles. Growing up, the woods were just a part of the landscape, a dark wall at the edge of our world. We respected it, but we weren't afraid of it. We'd see deer, the occasional black bear, coyotes. They were just neighbors. The farm was our territory. The woods were theirs. There was an unspoken agreement. This happened in the dead of winter. I was 16 years old. A massive snowstorm had blanketed the state a few days earlier, and now a cold snap had descended. The temperature outside was well below zero, and the snow was deep, crisp, and squeaked under your boots. It was one of those nights where the sky is perfectly clear, and a full moon makes the snow-covered landscape almost as bright as day. My parents had gone into town for a rare night out. It was their anniversary, and they were having dinner and seeing a movie. They left me home alone to finish up the evening chores. I'd done it 100 times before. It was no big deal. The main chore was to do a final check on the livestock in the big barn, make sure their heaters were working, and top off their feed and water. The barn was about 100 yards from the house, across an open yard. I put on my heaviest coat, boots, and gloves, and stepped out into the frigid night. The air was so cold it hurt to breathe. The world was starkly beautiful, all black shadows and brilliant blue-white snow under the moonlight. The silence was absolute, the kind of deep, heavy quiet that only happens in extreme cold. I walked to the barn, the sound of my boots crunching in the snow, seeming unnaturally loud. I slid open the huge, heavy door and stepped inside. The warmth and the smell of hay and animals was a welcome relief. I went about my tasks. Everything was normal. I checked on the dairy cows in their stanchions, then the horses in their stalls at the far end. That's when I noticed something was wrong. The animals were spooked. The cows, normally placid and content at this time of night, were on their feet. They were clustered together at the back of their enclosure, away from the side of the barn that faced the woods. Their eyes were wide, and they were shifting nervously, letting out low, distressed moans. The horses were even worse. They were stamping their feet, their ears twitching wildly. One of the mares was kicking at the side of her stall, a sharp, percussive sound of panic. I stood there for a moment, listening. Animals don't get this agitated for no reason. My first thought was a wolf or a coyote. Sometimes a pack would get bold and venture out of the state forest, drawn by the smell of the livestock. I finished my chores quickly, my own sense of unease growing with every nervous snort from the horses. I gave them one last look, then slid the barn door closed behind me, making sure the latch was secure. I stood in the yard between the barn and the house, my breath pluming in the freezing air. I listened. The deep silence of the night had returned, but it felt different now. It felt watchful. I scanned the edge of the property, my eyes tracing the dark, imposing line of the state forest at the far end of the north field. The moonlight was so bright on the snow that the field was like a vast white stage. The tree line was the curtain, and then I heard it, a sound coming from the direction of the woods, a heavy, rhythmic crunch, crunch, crunch in the snow. It was a footstep. No, two footsteps. It was the sound of something walking on two legs. My heart rate kicked up a notch. The sound was too heavy for a deer. The rhythm was too steady for a bear. My next thought was a person, maybe a hunter who had gotten lost or whose snowmobile had broken down. "Hello," I called out, my voice thin in the vast, cold air. "Is somebody out there?" The crunching stopped instantly. The silence that followed was more terrifying than the sound had been. I stood there, frozen in the middle of the yard, straining to see or hear anything, and then I saw it, a shape. At the edge of the woods, a figure detached itself from the deep shadows of the pines. It was just a silhouette at first, a column of black against the slightly less black forest. But it was tall, taller than any person. It took a step forward, out of the shadows, and into the full, brilliant moonlight of the open field, and my world tilted on its axis. It was standing on two legs, but it was not a man. It was huge, towering. I'm 6 feet tall now, and this thing would have dwarfed me. It had to be 8, maybe 9 feet tall. Its shoulders were incredibly broad, like a bodybuilder's, and its whole frame was thick with muscle and bulk, all of it covered in dark, shaggy fur that was almost black against the white snow. It stood there for a moment, and I could see its head turn, surveying the farm, the house, the barn. It moved its head with a slow, deliberate motion, and I saw the profile of its head against the snow. It was a snout, a long canine muzzle. Pointed ears stood sharply on top of its skull. My 16-year-old brain couldn't form a coherent thought. It was just a jumble of raw, primal signals. Wrong, impossible, not real. But my eyes were not lying. It was real. It was standing in my field. It turned its head and looked directly at me. Even from 200 yards away, I felt its gaze lock onto me. It was like being pinned by a physical force. There was no mistaking it. It knew I was there. It was looking right at me. Then, in a movement that was so fast and fluid it defied physics, it dropped down onto all fours. The transformation was sickening. It went from a towering bipedal giant to a low-slung quadrupedal predator in the blink of an eye. On all fours, it was still massive, its back as high as a pony's. It flexed its powerful shoulders, dug its claws into the snow, and it started to run. It wasn't a run, it was a lope. a terrifying ground-eating sprint like a greyhound, but 1,000 times bigger and more powerful. It was coming straight for me, across the open snowfield. The sight of it moving, of this impossible creature closing the distance with such incredible speed, finally broke my paralysis. A wave of pure, unadulterated terror washed over me. I wasn't thinking about the house. The barn was closer. I turned and sprinted for the barn. My boots slipped in the snow. I could hear the thump, thump, thump of its massive paws, hitting the frozen ground behind me. It was so fast, so unbelievably fast. I reached the barn door, my fingers numb and clumsy as I fumbled with the cold metal latch. I slid the huge door open just enough to slip through, then threw all my weight against it to slam it shut. Just as the door boomed closed, something slammed into the other side with incredible force. Boom! The entire barn door, made of 2-inch-thick oak planks, shuddered in its frame. Dust and snow shook loose from the rafters above. I heard a sound from the other side that I will hear in my nightmares for the rest of my life. A deep, wet, guttural snarl of pure rage and frustration. I scrambled back, my heart trying to beat its way out of my chest. I fumbled in the near darkness for the crossbar, a heavy 4x4 piece of timber that sat in brackets on the wall. My hands were shaking too badly. I couldn't lift it. Scrape, scratch, scrape, claws. It was clawing at the door. I could hear the sound of the wood splintering. Another massive impact. Boom! The door bowed inwards. A sliver of moonlight appeared where the two center planks began to separate. I finally managed to get my fingers under the heavy crossbar. Adrenaline gave me a strength I didn't know I had. I lifted the beam, staggered with it to the door, and dropped it into the heavy iron brackets. The solid thud of the bar seating was the most reassuring sound I had ever heard. The thing outside let out another enraged snarl. It slammed against the door again and again. The whole building shook with the impacts. The cows were bellowing in terror. The horses were screaming, a high, piercing sound of pure panic. I backed away from the door into the darkness of the barn. I grabbed the first thing I could find, a long-handled pitchfork. It felt pathetic, useless. I scrambled up the ladder into the hayloft, my body trembling uncontrollably. I lay flat on the hay-strewn floor, peering through a small crack between the floorboards. I could see the main barn floor below, and the barred door, starkly illuminated by the moonlight filtering through the dusty windows. The slamming stopped. I heard it moving. The crunch of its footsteps in the snow, circling the barn. It was testing for weaknesses. I could hear it sniffing at the walls, a loud, wet, snuffling sound. It scraped its claws against the foundation. Then it came back to the main door. I heard a low, guttural growl, and then a howl. It was a long, mournful, hungry sound that seemed to suck all the warmth from the air. It wasn't a wolf's howl. It was deeper, more powerful, and it had a strange, almost human-like quality to it. It was the sound of a thinking predator, frustrated and furious. I stayed in that hayloft, clutching the pitchfork for what felt like a lifetime. I was too scared to move, too scared to even breathe. I just listened. I listened to it circle the barn again. I heard it slam against the back wall a few times. The sounds were more muffled there, but still terrifyingly powerful. And then silence. The crunching footsteps faded, heading back toward the north field. I didn't believe it. I was sure it was a trick. I lay there, my muscles cramped, my body slick with cold sweat for at least an hour, maybe two. The silence was complete. The cows and horses had quieted down, their terror subsiding into nervous, shuddering stillness. I didn't move from that hayloft until I saw the twin beams of headlights coming down our long driveway. My parents. I practically fell down the ladder and threw the crossbar off the door. I ran out of the barn and sprinted for the house, not even daring to look toward the woods. I met my parents on the porch as they were walking up. I was hysterical. I couldn't form a sentence. I just pointed at the barn, babbling about a monster, about the door. My dad is a calm, quiet man. He's not prone to panic. He looked at my face, then at the barn, then back at me. He told my mom to take me inside. Then he walked into the house, came back out with his high-powered hunting rifle, and walked toward the barn. I watched from the kitchen window, my mom trying to get me to drink some hot tea. I saw my dad reach the barn. I saw him stop and stare at the door for a long time. Then he raised the rifle and slowly, carefully walked around the building, following the path the creature had taken. He was gone for maybe 10 minutes. When he came back inside, his face was pale. He locked the door behind him, and for the first time in my life, I saw my father look truly afraid. He sat down at the kitchen table across from me. "What did you see?" he asked, his voice low. I told him everything. The bipedal walk, the height, the wolf head, the speed, the way it attacked the barn. He listened without interrupting. When I was finished, he just nodded slowly. "On the door," he said, "there are claw marks, deep ones, gouged right into the oak, 4 of them, and the tracks in the snow." He trailed off, looking out the window toward the dark forest. "They're like a wolf's," he finally said, "but the size of a dinner plate, and the stride, when it was running, it had to be 15 feet between steps." We sat in silence for a moment. Then he looked at me, his eyes serious. "There are things in those woods, son, things that were here long before we were. We don't bother them, and most of the time they don't bother us. Tonight, something was different. We don't talk about this. Not to anyone. You understand?" I understood. The next day, my dad bought a new, heavier deadbolt for the front and back doors of the house, and from that day forward, his rifle never sat in the gun cabinet. It was always leaning against the wall by the back door, ready. That night changed me. I was never truly comfortable on the farm again. The woods at the edge of our property were no longer just a backdrop. They were a border, a boundary between my world and the world of something else. I always felt like I was being watched, especially at night. I left for college 2 years later and never moved back. I love my family, but I can't live there. I can't live with that constant low-level fear, with the knowledge of what waits in the darkness just beyond the fields. My dad never spoke of it again, but every time I go home to visit, I see the rifle by the back door. I see the deep, pale scars of the claw marks on the barn door, and I know he remembers. He knows what's out there. I'm sharing this because I carried that secret in silence for too long, just like my father wanted. But silence doesn't make it go away. It just lets the fear fester. People deserve to know. When you're in those quiet, rural places, and the night gets deep, and the woods get quiet, you are not alone. And you are not at the top of the food chain, and with that, we have come to the end of our stories for this evening. A genuine, heartfelt thank you to the individuals who trusted me, and all of you, with their experiences tonight. To be willing to revisit events that have clearly left such a deep and lasting mark takes a courage that I deeply respect. Sharing these things isn't easy, especially when the world is so quick to dismiss anything that doesn't fit into a neat, tidy box. So, to the people who wrote in, thank you. And thank you to every single one of you for taking the time to listen, for creating a space where these accounts can be shared without judgment or ridicule. That's all because of you. I see the comments you all leave. I see the discussions, the support, the empathy you show for the people whose stories are featured. This community continues to be one of the most respectful and thoughtful places on the internet, and I appreciate that more than you know. If you found value in what we do here, and you want to help support it, the easiest way is to just hit the like button. Share this video with someone you think might appreciate it. And if you haven't already, consider subscribing to the channel. It helps more than you might think. But most importantly, take care of yourselves. Take care of each other. Watch over your loved ones and keep your head on a swivel. Stay safe out there. I love each and every one of you. Until next time, my friends, good night. Before all this happened, I was the kind of person who felt more at home in the woods than in a city. I still live in the same house, on the same piece of land my grandfather bought 60 years ago, but my relationship with the world outside my four walls is completely broken. It's a fracture that won't ever heal right. I know that now. I worked for the county maintaining infrastructure. That's a vague way of putting it. Mostly, I drove out to the middle of nowhere to check on power lines, culverts, and remote pumping stations. It was a good job for a guy like me. I like being alone. I like the quiet. The pay was decent, and the benefits were solid. I got a county truck, a gas card, and a list of locations to check on a weekly or monthly basis. Most of my time was spent driving down dirt roads that most people didn't even know existed. The road where it happened is called Old Mill Trace. It doesn't show up on most maps anymore. It's a 10-mile stretch of packed dirt and gravel that cuts through a huge tract of state-owned forest land. It was originally cut for logging operations back in the 40s, but the timber company went bust, and the state just sort of absorbed the land. The road was never officially decommissioned, but it was never maintained either. The county only cared about it because a single, critical power trunk line ran parallel to it for about 3 miles. That was my job. Once a month, I had to drive that section of Old Mill Trace and visually inspect the poles and the line for any damage from fallen trees or weather. I'd been doing that specific run for about 5 years. I knew every pothole, every washout, every place where the deer liked to cross at dusk. It was a routine, a boring, comfortable routine. I'd usually do it on the last Friday of the month. I'd save it for the end of the day. It was my way of winding down the week. Just me, the truck, and the woods. That day was no different. It was late October. The air was getting that crisp, cold edge to it, the kind that smells like wood smoke and decaying leaves. The sun was going down, painting the whole sky in shades of orange and deep purple. It was beautiful. I remember thinking that. I remember feeling perfectly content. I had my window down, the heater blasting at my feet to fight the chill, and some old country station playing low on the radio. I turned off the paved county highway onto Old Mill Trace right around sunset. The truck's tires crunched on the gravel, a familiar, satisfying sound. The road immediately dives into the trees. The canopy overhead is so thick in spots that it feels like you're driving through a tunnel, even in the middle of the day. At dusk, it gets dark fast. I drove the first couple of miles just like always. I wasn't even really thinking about the power lines yet. That part of the inspection was easy. You just drive slow and look up. I was thinking about what my wife was making for dinner. I was thinking about the high school football game that night. Normal things. The part of the road I needed to inspect started at a little wooden bridge that crossed a creek. I always stopped there. It was my landmark. I parked the truck just past the bridge, put on the hazard lights, and got out to stretch my legs. The radio signal had already faded to static, so I shut it off. And that's when I first noticed it. The silence. It wasn't just quiet. It was a heavy, oppressive silence. If you spend enough time in the woods, you know there's always noise. Always. Crickets, frogs, the rustle of some small animal in the underbrush, the wind in the trees. There was none of that. It was like someone had hit a mute button on the entire forest. The only sound was the faint ticking of my truck's engine as it cooled. I stood there for a minute, listening. It was unnerving. I've been in the woods during a hard freeze when things get quiet, but this was different. This felt wrong. It felt like every living thing for a mile in every direction was holding its breath. I tried to shake it off. Maybe a predator was nearby, a coyote, maybe a bobcat. That could make the woods go quiet for a bit. It was a logical explanation. It made sense. So I decided to just get on with it. The sooner I finished my inspection, the sooner I could get back to the paved road and the world that made sense. I got back in the truck, but I left the radio off. The silence was getting under my skin, and I wanted to be able to hear what was going on outside. I started driving again, much slower this time, my eyes scanning the power lines that ran about 50 yards off the road to my right. Pole 1? Fine. Pole 2? Fine. The tree line was a solid wall of black in the fading light. My headlights cut a clean white tunnel in front of me, but everything outside of that beam was just pitch dark. Between pole 2 and pole 3, I caught the smell. It wasn't strong at first, just a whiff. It was foul. My first thought was a dead animal. A deer, maybe, hit by a car on the main road, and it had wandered in here to die. It happens. But the smell was off. It wasn't just the smell of rot. There was something else mixed in, something musky and rank, like a wet dog, that had rolled in something awful. It was thick and oily, and it coated the inside of my throat. I rolled up my window. The smell was still there, seeping in through the vents. It was getting stronger, much stronger. By the time I was approaching the third pole, the stench was overwhelming. It was the smell of a slaughterhouse, blood and guts and filth. My stomach turned. I started to think maybe it wasn't a deer. Maybe someone was illegally dumping trash out here. People did that sometimes. They'd bring a truck full of household garbage or even slaughtered livestock from a farm and just push it into a ravine to avoid paying disposal fees. It made me angry. This was a beautiful place, and the thought of someone treating it like a landfill. I slowed the truck to a crawl, peering into the darkness on the right side of the road. I couldn't see anything, just the impenetrable black wall of trees. The smell was so strong now, it was making my eyes water. It seemed to be coming from a specific spot, just off the road ahead of me. That's when the feeling started, the one that's hardest to explain. It was the feeling of being watched. It's a primal thing, an instinct. The little hairs on the back of my neck stood up. I felt a cold dread pool in the pit of my stomach. It wasn't just a vague feeling. It felt specific. It felt like there were eyes on me, on the truck, coming from that spot where the smell was thickest. I stopped the truck completely. My hand was hovering over the switch for the roof-mounted spotlight. Part of me, the logical part, was still trying to rationalize. It's a bear, I told myself. A big black bear. Maybe it found a carcass, and it's defending its meal. That would explain the smell, the silence, and the feeling of being watched. Bears can be curious. They'll watch you. But another part of me, a much older, more primitive part, was screaming that this was not a bear. I sat there for what felt like an eternity, but was probably only 30 seconds. The silence outside was absolute. The only sound was my own breathing, which was suddenly loud and ragged in the cab of the truck. The smell was suffocating. I had a choice. I could put the truck in reverse and back out the 2 miles to the bridge and then drive away. Or I could keep going forward, finish my inspection, and get out that way. Going forward was shorter. It was only about a mile to the end of Old Mill Trace, but I would have to drive right past whatever it was, or I could do the third thing, the stupid thing, the thing that I will regret for the rest of my life. I could try to see what it was. My curiosity, or maybe just my stubborn refusal to be spooked off a job I'd done 100 times, got the better of me. I told myself I just needed to confirm it was a bear. I'd see the bear, it would probably run off when the light hit it, and I could go on my way. My nerves settled. That was a mistake. I flipped the switch for the spotlight. The beam was powerful. It cut a perfect, bright white circle, 100 yards across. I aimed it toward the side of the road, into the trees, right where the smell seemed to be coming from. The light swept across the underbrush and the trunks of pine trees. At first, I saw nothing, just leaves and branches and dirt. I moved the beam slowly, methodically, back and forth, left, right. Nothing. My logical brain felt a wave of relief. See? Nothing there. You're just spooking yourself. It's a dead animal, and the smell is playing tricks on your mind. I was just about to switch the light off and drive away when I swept the beam back to the left one last time. And that's when I saw it. It wasn't the whole thing, just a part of it. At the absolute edge of the spotlight's reach, something moved. It was big, and it was dark. It was just a shape, a silhouette against the slightly less black background of the deep woods. It was standing behind a thick oak tree, partially obscured. My heart hammered against my ribs. Bear, I whispered to myself. The word felt hollow and false. I held the light steady on the tree. My hand was shaking. I could see the shape more clearly now. It was tall, taller than a man, and it was standing upright, not on all fours like a bear that had reared up to get a better look. It was standing on two legs casually like a person would. But it wasn't a person. The proportions were all wrong. It was too broad at the shoulders, way too broad. And its arms, they were long. They hung down almost to its knees. Even from that distance, I could see they were thick with muscle. I couldn't see its head. It was behind the tree trunk, but I could see the top of its shoulders, and they were massive. I'm not a small man. I'm 6'1" and 200 pounds. This thing, whatever it was, made me feel like a child. It had to be at least 7 feet tall, maybe taller. My mind was racing, trying to find a file for what I was looking at. A man in a ghillie suit? A hunter playing a prank? No. No hunter would be out here in the pitch black with no light. And the shape? It wasn't a suit. It looked organic. The outline was covered in what looked like shaggy, matted hair or fur. The smell hit me again, a fresh wave of it, so intense it was like a physical blow. It was coming from that thing. I knew it. I sat there, frozen, the spotlight fixed on the spot. My hand was slick with sweat on the joystick that controlled the light. My breath was fogging up the inside of the windshield. Don't move. Don't make a sound. That was the only thought in my head. Maybe it hasn't seen me. Maybe it thinks the light is just the moon or something. Then it moved. It didn't run. It didn't startle. It just took a step. It stepped out from behind the tree. And I saw it. All of it. My brain simply stopped working for a second. It was like a computer trying to open a file that was corrupted beyond all recognition. The image that my eyes were sending to my brain was so impossible, so fundamentally wrong, that my mind just refused to process it. It was standing fully in the beam of the spotlight now, not 50 yards from my truck. It was tall, as I'd thought, easily 7.5, maybe 8 feet tall. It was built like a bodybuilder, but lean, with long, powerful limbs. Its whole body was covered in dark, coarse-looking fur, the color of charcoal and mud. It was standing on two legs that were shaped like a dog's or a wolf's, bent backward at the hock, but they were long and muscular, like a man's legs. It had long, muscular arms with huge, clawed hands. But the head, my God, the head, it was the head of a wolf or a dog, a huge, monstrous dog. It had a long snout filled with teeth that I could see even from that distance because its lips were pulled back in a silent snarl. It had pointed ears that were perched high on its head, twitching, reacting to sounds I couldn't hear. And its eyes, they glowed in the spotlight, not the green or white reflection you see from a cat or a deer. They glowed a deep amber orange, like coals in a fire, and they were staring directly at me. There was no confusion in those eyes. There was no animal curiosity. There was intelligence. There was malice. It knew I was in the truck. It knew I was the one holding the light on it. And it did not like it. We were locked in that stare for a second that stretched into a lifetime. All the stories you hear as a kid, the local legends about things in the woods, the boogeyman, they all came rushing back into my mind. I always thought they were just stories, fun to tell around a campfire, but nothing more. I was wrong. The thing in my headlights was real, and it was looking at me like I was meat. The spell broke when it took another step. This time, it was towards the truck. A tidal wave of pure, abject terror washed over me. It was a chemical reaction. Every instinct, Every cell in my body screamed one word: run! My body moved before my brain did. My hand, which had been frozen on the spotlight control, flew to the gear shift. I slammed it into reverse. My foot stomped on the gas pedal. The engine roared. The tires spun on the loose gravel, spitting rocks and dirt. The truck lurched backward. The thing reacted instantly. It didn't flinch at the noise. It didn't run away. The moment my engine screamed, it dropped. It went from standing on two legs to all fours in a fraction of a second. The movement was so fluid, so unnaturally fast, it made me sick to my stomach. It wasn't like a man dropping to his hands and knees. It was like a piece of horrifying machinery unfolding. And then it charged. It wasn't running like a dog or a wolf. It was moving in these incredible, powerful bounds, covering huge distances with each leap. It moved with a speed that didn't seem possible for something so large. My truck was still skidding backward, my hands yanking the steering wheel to try and keep it on the narrow road. I couldn't take my eyes off it. It was a dark, bounding shape in my headlights, getting closer with terrifying speed. The back of the truck fishtailed, and the rear bumper slammed into a tree on the side of the road with a sickening crunch of metal. The impact threw me forward, my chest hitting the steering wheel. The engine stalled. Silence. For one horrifying second, the world went completely silent again. The headlights were still on, and the thing was still there. It had stopped when I hit the tree. It was about 30 yards away now, crouched low to the ground, its amber eyes burning holes in the night. I could hear it now, a low, guttural growl that seemed to vibrate the very air in the cab. It wasn't the growl of a bear or a dog. It was deeper. It was a sound of pure hatred. My hand was shaking so violently I could barely fit the key back into the ignition. My fingers felt like clumsy, useless sausages. I could feel my heart trying to beat its way out of my chest. "Come on, come on, come on," I chanted under my breath. The key turned. The engine sputtered. It didn't catch. The thing on the road pushed itself up slightly. It was getting ready to charge again. I knew it. I turned the key again. The starter ground away, a pathetic, whining sound against the deep growl from the darkness. Nothing. A new smell filled the cab, the smell of raw, unadulterated fear. My own. I risked a glance away from the creature down at the gear shift. I was still in reverse. Maybe that was the problem. Some trucks have a neutral safety switch. I slammed the gear shift into park. I looked back up. It was closer. It had covered 10 yards without me even seeing it move. It was just there, closer. Its head was low, its massive shoulders bunched up like a sprinter in the starting blocks. The growl was louder now, a constant, rumbling threat. I could see the muscles in its legs twitching. I twisted the key one last time, praying to a god I hadn't spoken to in years. The engine caught. It roared to life, loud and angry and beautiful. It was the most wonderful sound I had ever heard in my entire life. Without even thinking, I slammed the gear shift into drive, cranked the wheel, and stomped on the gas. The truck leaped forward, tires screaming. I wasn't even trying to stay on the road anymore. I was just going away. I sideswiped another tree, the passenger side mirror exploding into a shower of plastic and glass. A branch scraped down the side of the truck with a sound like giant fingernails on a chalkboard. I didn't care. I glanced in the rearview mirror. It was running behind me. It was on all fours, its body stretched out, eating up the ground with those terrifying loping strides. It was keeping pace with the truck. I was doing 30, maybe 35 miles an hour on a road that was barely safe at 15, and it was right behind me. Its amber eyes were locked on the back of my truck. I could see its snout, its teeth. It was so close, so unbelievably close. I pushed the accelerator to the floor. The old county truck wasn't built for speed, but I gave it everything it had. The engine screamed in protest. The speedometer needle crept up to 40. 45. The whole truck was shaking violently, bouncing over potholes and rocks. I was barely in control. I looked in the mirror again. It was still there. It was running alongside the truck now, just outside the passenger window. I could hear its claws scrabbling on the gravel, the huffing sound of its breath. It was a nightmare, a living, breathing, running nightmare right outside my door. It was looking at me. It turned its head, and for a split second, our eyes met again. The driver's side window was still down a few inches from earlier. The stench of it flooded the cab. It was so powerful I gagged. Then it lunged. It leaped at the side of the truck. I felt a massive impact, a heavy, solid thud that rocked the entire vehicle. The truck swerved violently to the left. I screamed, a raw, terrified sound, and yanked the wheel back to the right. I heard a scraping sound, metal on bone or claw. It had tried to get in. It had tried to come through the passenger window. I risked another look. It was gone from the side. I checked the rear view mirror. It was falling back. The truck was finally pulling away. I saw it for one last moment, a tall, dark shape slowing to a stop in the middle of the road, watching me go. Then the road curved, and it was gone. I didn't slow down. I kept my foot pressed to the floor. My knuckles were white on the steering wheel. My whole body was trembling uncontrollably. Tears were streaming down my face, but I wasn't crying. It was just a physical reaction to the terror. The next mile to the end of Old Mill Trace was a blur. I don't remember any of it. My brain had just shut down all non-essential functions. All that existed was the gas pedal and the steering wheel. Then I saw it, the blessed, beautiful sight of pavement, the stop sign where the dirt road met the county highway. I didn't stop. I blew right through the stop sign, tires squealing as I hit the asphalt, and swerved into the oncoming lane. Thank God nothing was coming. I corrected, got the truck into the right lane, and just kept going. I drove for 5 miles, doing 70 in a 45 zone, before I even started to process what had just happened. My hands started to shake so badly I could barely hold the steering wheel. I had to pull over. I pulled onto the shoulder of the road, under the safe, artificial glow of a streetlight. I put the truck in park and just fell apart. I started sobbing, huge, gulping, racking sobs, the kind you can't control. It was all the fear, all the adrenaline, all the horror just pouring out of me. I sat there for 20 minutes, maybe half an hour, just crying in my truck on the side of the road. When I finally got myself under control, the shaking didn't stop. I was freezing cold, even with the heater on full blast. I had to get home. The drive back to my house was the longest of my life. Every shadow on the side of the road was a monster. Every pair of headlights in my rearview mirror sent a jolt of panic through me. I was a wreck. When I pulled into my driveway, I didn't even bother to park the truck neatly. I just left it in the middle of the gravel, the engine running, the headlights cutting across the front of my house. I ran inside. I didn't walk. I ran. My wife was in the kitchen. She looked up, startled. "What's wrong? You look like you've seen a ghost." I couldn't speak. I just went around the house and locked every single door. I closed every blind, every curtain. I turned on every light in the house, the living room, the kitchen, the bedrooms, the bathrooms, all of them. I finally went back to the kitchen. My wife was standing there, her arms crossed, a look of deep concern on her face. "What is going on?" she asked. I tried to tell her. I really did. The words just wouldn't come out right. They tumbled out in a jumbled, panicked mess. The road, old Mill Trace, something in the woods. It was huge. It chased me. She listened, her expression shifting from concern to confusion, and then to a kind of gentle pity. "Honey, slow down," she said, putting a hand on my arm. My skin was ice cold. "You must have had a scare. Did a deer run out in front of you?" "No," I said, my voice shaking. "It wasn't a deer. It was a monster." I saw the look in her eyes, the look of someone trying to be patient with a person who isn't making sense. "Maybe it was a bear," she suggested. "A big one. You were tired. It was dark. Your mind could have played tricks on you." "It wasn't a bear," I said, my voice rising. "It had the head of a wolf. It ran on two legs. It tried to get in the truck." She just stared at me. She didn't know what to say. I could see her trying to find a rational explanation. She thought I was having a breakdown. Maybe I was. I gave up. I couldn't make her understand. How could I? I barely understood it myself. I just shook my head and went into the living room. I sat on the couch, staring at the drawn curtains for the rest of the night. I didn't sleep, not 1 minute. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw those glowing amber eyes. I heard that guttural growl. The next morning, I went out to look at the truck. I had to know if the damage was real. It was. The rear bumper was dented and pushed in on one side. The entire passenger side was scraped and scratched with a long, deep gouge running from the passenger door to the rear fender. The side mirror was gone. But that wasn't the worst part. On the passenger door, right below the window, were 3 long, deep scratches. They were parallel, about 4 inches apart. They had cut through the paint, through the primer, all the way down to the bare metal. At the bottom of each scratch, the metal was peeled back slightly, like the tip of a can opener had dug in and then slipped. Claw marks. I stood there, staring at them, and the terror from the night before came flooding back. It was real. It had all been real. I wasn't crazy. I called my boss. I told him I had an accident with the truck. I told him I hit a deer and then scraped a tree. It was a partial truth. He was annoyed about the paperwork, but he said to just bring the truck in on Monday, and they'd deal with it. I told him I wasn't feeling well and that I was taking the day off. I spent the entire weekend in a fog. I barely ate. I couldn't sleep. I just sat, watching the windows, my shotgun loaded, and leaning against the wall next to me. My wife tried to talk to me, but I couldn't engage. She was worried. She thought I'd had some kind of psychotic break. In a way, I guess I had. My reality had been broken. On Monday, I drove the truck to the county garage. My supervisor, a guy named Dave I'd known for years, came out to look at it. He whistled when he saw the damage. "Geez, you really did a number on it. Must have been a big deer." "Yeah," I mumbled, "a big one." He walked around the truck, taking notes on a clipboard. He stopped at the passenger door. He stared at the 3 deep scratches for a long time. He ran his finger over one of them. "What the hell did this?" he asked, looking at me. I didn't know what to say. The truth was sitting on the tip of my tongue, screaming to get out. But I couldn't. He would think I was insane. He'd probably make me take a drug test. "The branch," I lied. "When I swerved, I hit a tree. A branch must have done it." Dave looked from the scratches back to my face. He had a strange look in his eyes. He knew I was lying. He had to. A branch doesn't make 3 perfectly parallel, deep gouges like that. But he just nodded. "Right, a branch." He finished his notes and told me they'd get it to the body shop. He assigned me a different truck. As I was walking away, he called out to me. "Hey!" I turned around. "You okay?" he asked. His voice was serious. "You seem off." "I'm fine," I said. "Just shaken up." He just stood there for a moment, then gave me a short nod. "All right, just be careful out there, especially on those back roads. Lots of weird stuff in those woods." That was it. He didn't press, but the way he said it. Lots of weird stuff in those woods. It made me wonder if I wasn't the first person to come back from a remote job with a wild story and a damaged truck. I never asked him about it. I was too scared. I went back to work, but things were never the same. I couldn't do the remote jobs anymore. The thought of being alone on a dirt road miles from anywhere filled me with a paralyzing dread. I started making excuses. I'd say I was feeling sick, or that another job was more urgent. After a couple of months of me avoiding my primary duties, Dave called me into his office. He was a good boss, a fair man. He told me that my performance had dropped, that I wasn't completing my routes. He asked me what was going on. I thought about telling him everything: the silence, the smell, the 8-foot-tall wolfman that tried to tear me out of my truck. But I looked at his face, his normal, reasonable face, and I just couldn't. I would lose my job. They would send me for a psychiatric evaluation. So I told him I was having some health problems, that I was dealing with anxiety. It wasn't a total lie. I was drowning in anxiety. I asked him if there were any other positions available, something that didn't involve so much remote work. He found me a spot on the road crew, patching potholes and doing flagging. It was a demotion, and it came with a pay cut. But I took it. I took it because it meant I would never have to be alone in the woods again. My life is completely different now. I don't hunt anymore. I don't go camping. I don't even like to go for walks in the park near my house if it's getting close to dusk. That feeling of peace I used to get from being in nature is gone forever. Now, when I look at a line of trees, I don't see beauty. I see a hiding place. I see a place where things that shouldn't exist can watch and wait. My wife and I almost didn't make it. My behavior was erratic. I was paranoid. I installed floodlights on all 4 corners of my house. I put new, heavy-duty locks on all the doors and windows. I bought a new, more powerful rifle, and I kept it clean and loaded. For the first year, I barely slept. I would sit up all night, watching the tree line at the edge of my property, waiting. She begged me to see a therapist. I refused. What would I tell them? How do you explain a trauma that the rest of the world doesn't even believe is possible. She thought I had PTSD from a car accident, that I was exaggerating in my mind. It was easier to let her believe that than to keep insisting on a truth that was tearing us apart. We're better now. I've learned to function. I've learned to push the memory down during the day. But at night, it's always there, in my dreams. I'm back on that road. I see the amber eyes in the dark. I smell that rotten, musky stench. I feel the truck shake as it hits me. I wake up in a cold sweat, my heart pounding, the scream still caught in my throat. I've never been back to Old Mill Trace. I don't even like driving on that section of the county highway anymore. As far as I know, the county just stopped sending people out to check on that power line. Maybe the line failed and they just rerouted it. Or maybe, just maybe, someone else saw something out there and the county decided that road wasn't worth the risk. I'll never know. I'm too afraid to ask. I'm not writing this to convince anyone. If you're a skeptic, nothing I say will change your mind. You'll say it was a bear. You'll say I was hallucinating. You'll say I made it all up. That's fine. A few years ago, I would have been you. I would have read this story and thought the writer was crazy. I'm writing this for the other people, the people like me, the people who spend time in the deep woods, far from the streetlights and the sounds of civilization, the people who feel at home out there. I want to tell you that you are not as safe as you think you are. The world is older and stranger than we know. There are things living in the dark places that the modern world has forgotten. They are big, and they are fast, and they are not afraid of you. I know what I saw that night. It wasn't a bear. A bear doesn't have the head of a wolf. A bear doesn't stand 8 feet tall on 2 legs that bend the wrong way. A bear doesn't show intelligent, malevolent intent in its eyes. A bear doesn't try to rip you out of a moving truck. What I saw was something else. Something ancient and predatory. I don't know what it's called. I've seen the names online. Dogman, werewolf. It doesn't matter what the label is. What matters is that it's real. So, if you're ever out on a lonely road late at night and the woods go silent and you get that feeling that you're being watched, trust it. Don't get out of your car. Don't try to be brave. Don't let your curiosity get the better of you. Lock your doors, roll up your windows, and drive. Drive as fast as you can, and don't look back, because what you don't see can't hurt you, but what you do see can break your mind and haunt you for the rest of your life. I know. It happened to me. Name withheld. Welcome back, everyone. No matter where you are in the world, no matter what time it may be, I hope you are all doing well out there. I hope you are safe and sound. Tonight, we have a few stories for you. These accounts come to us from regular people, people just like you and me, who found themselves in situations they cannot explain. They are presented here exactly as they were sent to me. We are not here to push any specific conclusions. We are not here to tell you what to believe. We are simply here to listen. The experiences you are about to hear are deeply personal and often deeply unsettling. If you have had an experience of your own that you feel you need to share, a story that has been weighing on you, my email address is in the description of this video. Your anonymity is always respected. Sometimes just getting the story out is the most important step. So for everyone listening tonight, new friends and old legends, grab a drink, lock your doors and windows, hit the lights. Let's get started. The first story tonight comes from a man who wanted to remain anonymous. He says this happened about 15 years ago, but that it feels like it was just last night. He writes, I grew up in the country, deep in the Appalachian Mountains. My family had a piece of land that had been passed down for generations. It was mostly woods, steep hills, and deep hollers, with a small cabin my grandfather built near a creek. For me, those woods were my backyard. I knew every trail, every big rock, every bend in the creek. I was never afraid of them, not then. I was in my early 20s at the time this happened. I was living in the main house with my parents, but I spent a lot of my free time down at the old cabin. It was my escape. No phone, no television, just a wood stove, a cot, and the sound of the woods. I'd been doing this my whole life. Go down to the cabin, spend a night or two, do some fishing, maybe some small game hunting, in season. It was routine. It was safe. This particular weekend was in late October. The leaves were mostly down, covering the ground in a thick, crunchy carpet. It was getting cold, that damp cold that seeps into your bones. I told my folks I was heading down to the cabin for the night. My mom told me to be careful, like she always did. My dad just nodded. He knew I could handle myself. I packed a small bag with some food, a book, and an extra blanket. I had my rifle with me, a little .22. Not for protection, really. More for squirrels or rabbits, if I felt like it. The walk to the cabin was about a mile from the main house. The path was worn and familiar. I remember the air smelled like wet leaves and wood smoke. The sun was starting to go down, casting long shadows through the bare trees. Everything was normal. I got to the cabin, unlocked the door, and dropped my gear inside. First thing I always did was get a fire going in the wood stove. The cabin was small, just one room, and it didn't take long to warm up. I sat on the porch for a while, just listening to the woods settle down for the evening. The birds were doing their last calls. A squirrel chattered angrily from a nearby oak tree. It was peaceful. As dusk turned to full dark, I went inside. I lit an old kerosene lamp, the kind with the glass chimney. It cast a warm, flickering glow around the small room. I ate a sandwich and read my book for a couple of hours. The only sounds were the crackling of the fire in the stove and the gentle hiss of the lamp. Outside, it was completely silent, and that was the first thing that was wrong. Usually, at night, you hear things, crickets, owls, the rustle of some small animal in the leaves. But there was nothing, just a deep, heavy silence that felt like it was pressing in on the thin walls of the cabin. I tried to ignore it, told myself it was just a cold night. Maybe the animals were all bedded down early, but the feeling wouldn't go away. It was that feeling you get when you know you're being watched. The hair on the back of my neck was standing up. I put my book down and just listened. The silence was absolute. It was unnatural. Then I heard it, a sound from outside. It was a heavy footstep, just one. It sounded like someone wearing a heavy boot, stepping on a dry branch, a loud, sharp crack that shattered the silence. My heart jumped into my throat. My first thought was that it was my dad, coming to check on me. But he would have called out. He wouldn't just sneak up on the cabin. I waited, listening. Nothing. Just that oppressive silence again. I stood up and walked quietly to the single window next to the door. The window was small, just a single pane of glass. I looked out, but I couldn't see anything. It was pitch black outside the small circle of light cast by the lamp. I stood there for what felt like 10 minutes, just staring out into the darkness, my ears straining for any sound. I was trying to rationalize it. A deer. It had to be a deer. They get clumsy sometimes, but it didn't sound like a deer. The step was too heavy, too deliberate. Then I smelled it. It came faintly at first, just a whiff, a foul, musky odor, like a wet dog that had rolled in something dead. It was strong, and it was getting stronger. It was seeping through the cracks in the old cabin walls. My fear went from a nervous flutter to a cold, hard knot in my stomach. This wasn't a deer. This wasn't my dad. Something was outside my cabin, and it was close. I backed away from the window, my eyes wide. I grabbed my .22 rifle from the corner. It felt impossibly small and useless in my hands. I didn't even know if it was loaded. I checked. It was. I stood in the middle of the room, the rifle held tight against my chest, my back to the warm stove. My whole body was trembling. I heard another sound, a scratching sound. It was coming from the wall on the far side of the cabin, the one without any windows. It was a slow, deliberate scrape. Scrape, pause, scrape, like claws being dragged down the old wood planks. I pointed the rifle at the wall, my fingers shaking on the trigger. What was I going to do? Shoot through the wall? The idea was insane. The scratching stopped. The silence returned, but it was worse now. It was an expectant silence. I could hear my own blood pounding in my ears. Then came a new sound. It was a low sound, a deep, guttural noise, a growl, but it wasn't like any dog or bear I'd ever heard. It was deeper, more resonant. It vibrated through the floorboards and up into my feet. The sound was filled with a menace that was intelligent. It wasn't just an animal warning. It felt like a threat. The growl rumbled for a few seconds and then stopped. I was frozen. I couldn't move. I could barely breathe. My mind was racing, trying to make sense of what was happening. A bear? A big one? Bears don't act like this. They don't circle a cabin and scratch at the walls. They're either afraid of you or they attack. They don't play games. Then I heard footsteps again. This time, it was more than one. It was walking, slowly. It was circling the cabin. I could hear the heavy steps in the dry leaves. Thump, crunch, thump, crunch. And it was on 2 feet. There was no mistaking it. It was the rhythm of a bipedal walk. A person? A very large person? But the growl, the smell, the scratching, none of it made sense. The footsteps came around to the front of the cabin. They stopped right in front of the door. I could feel it standing there, just on the other side of that thin wooden door. The smell was overpowering now. It was a suffocating stench of wet fur and rot and something else, something metallic, like old blood. I held my breath, pointing the useless rifle at the door. I was expecting it to start pounding on the door, to try and break it down. But it didn't. It just stood there. I could hear it breathing. A deep, wet, raspy sound. Inhale, exhale. It was so close. Then the doorknob started to turn. Slowly, my blood ran cold. I watched in absolute horror as the old brass knob twisted back and forth. Jiggle, jiggle, turn. It was trying to open the door. It was testing the lock. This wasn't an animal. This was something that understood how a door worked. The thought broke something in my brain. The panic I had been holding back washed over me in a tidal wave. I screamed. I don't even remember doing it. It was a raw, primal sound of pure terror. The instant I screamed, the knob stopped turning. There was a loud, explosive snarl from the other side of the door. It was a sound of pure rage. Then something slammed into the door with incredible force. The whole cabin shook. The door bowed inwards, the wood splintering around the lock. It hit the door again, and again. Boom! 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 I scrambled backwards, falling over a stool. I crab-walked away from the door until my back hit the wall. I raised the rifle, my hands slick with sweat. The door was not going to hold. One more hit, and it would be inside with me. I had to do something. I couldn't stay there. The only other way out was the window. The window on the front wall, right next to the door, right next to where this thing was. It was a terrible idea. It was the only idea I had. As it hit the door again, the wood groaning in protest, I made my move. I scrambled to the window. I didn't bother trying to unlatch it. I used the butt of my rifle and smashed the glass. It shattered outwards with a loud crash. For a split second, everything went silent. The pounding on the door stopped. I didn't hesitate. I threw the rifle out the window and then scrambled to climb through. The frame was small, and I was not a small guy. I got my head and shoulders through, my side scraping against the jagged edges of the broken glass. I felt a sharp pain, but I didn't care. I was halfway out when I saw it. It was standing just a few feet away, near the corner of the cabin, momentarily distracted by the sound of the breaking glass. The light from the kerosene lamp spilled out of the broken window, illuminating it. And I will see it for the rest of my life. It was huge. It had to be 7, maybe 8 feet tall. It was standing on 2 legs that were bent backwards like a dog's. It was covered in thick, dark, matted fur. Its arms were long and muscular, ending in hands that had long, black claws. But the head, God, the head! It was the head of a wolf, a monstrous, oversized wolf's head, a long snout filled with yellow teeth, pointed ears on top of its head, swiveling towards me, and its eyes. They were glowing, a faint, sickly, yellow-green light, like 2 embers in the dark, and they were filled with a terrifying, hateful intelligence. It saw me. We locked eyes for just a second. Time seemed to stop. In that 1 second, I knew it was not an animal. It was a monster, and it wanted me dead. It let out a roar, not a growl, not a snarl, a full-throated roar that shook the very air. It was the sound of a nightmare come to life. That sound broke my paralysis. I kicked and thrashed, pulling the rest of my body through the window. I landed hard on the ground, the cold, wet leaves sticking to my face. I didn't look back. I just ran. I ran like I had never run in my life. I ran blindly into the darkness, away from the cabin, away from the light. I could hear it behind me. I could hear its heavy footfalls crashing through the underbrush. It was fast, so incredibly fast. I was running for my life, fueled by pure adrenaline, and it was gaining on me. I could hear its ragged breathing. I could smell that awful stench. I ran up the path towards the main house, my lungs burning, my legs screaming. I risked a glance over my shoulder. I could see its shape against the slightly less dark sky, a towering, hulking silhouette, moving with an unnatural, loping gait. It was closing the distance. I knew I wasn't going to make it. It was going to catch me. I stumbled on a root, my ankle twisting. I went down hard, my face slamming into the dirt. Pain shot up my leg. I tried to get up, but my ankle wouldn't hold my weight. I was done. I rolled over onto my back, trying to scramble away, kicking with my good leg. It was there, looming over me. It stopped just a few feet away. I could see the glint of its eyes in the dark. I could see the outline of its massive form. It let out a low rumbling growl. It was enjoying this. It was savoring the moment. I closed my eyes. I was waiting for the claws, the teeth, and then a light. A bright, blinding light flooded the path. A voice shouted, "Hey, what's going on down there?" It was my dad. The creature flinched back from the light. It let out another furious snarl, not at me, but at the light. My dad shouted again, his voice closer now. "Son, is that you?" The creature looked from the light back down to me. It took one step back, then another, and then, with a speed that was impossible, it turned and vanished into the trees. It didn't run. It just was gone. One moment, it was there, a solid, terrifying presence. The next, there was nothing but the dark woods. My dad reached me a few seconds later, a big mag light in his hand. "What in the world happened? I heard you scream." I couldn't speak. I was shaking so hard I couldn't form words. I just pointed into the darkness where it had disappeared. He helped me up. He had to half carry me back to the house, my arm slung over his shoulder. My mom was waiting on the porch, her face a mask of worry. They got me inside, sat me down in the kitchen. They saw the cut on my side, my sprained ankle, my face covered in dirt. "What happened?" my mom asked, her voice trembling. I tried to tell them. I tried to explain what I saw, a monster, a wolf man. They looked at me like I was crazy. My dad said it was probably a bear. "A big bear, maybe a sick one," he said. "It got spooked by my light." I shook my head. "No, Dad, it wasn't a bear. It stood on two legs. It had a wolf's head. It tried to open the door." He just sighed. "You were scared, son. Your mind was playing tricks on you." The next morning, he and I went back down to the cabin. My sprained ankle was swollen, but I had to go. I had to show him the proof. The cabin was a mess. The window was shattered. The door was nearly broken off its hinges. There were deep, long scratches in the wood of the walls and the door. And there were tracks. In the soft dirt around the cabin, there were huge tracks. They were not bear tracks. They were not human tracks. They looked like a wolf's paw print, but they were massive, and they were walking on 2 feet. I pointed them out to my dad. He stared at them for a long time. He didn't say anything. He just stood there, his face pale. He looked from the tracks to the damaged door, then back to the tracks. Finally, he looked at me. "We're not coming down here after dark anymore," he said. And that was it. We never spoke of it again. He never admitted what he saw, what he must have known. But he knew. I saw it in his eyes. We boarded up the cabin that day. We never used it again. It's been 15 years. I don't live there anymore. I moved away as soon as I could, but the memory of that night has never left me. I still have nightmares. I see those glowing yellow eyes in the dark. I hear that roar. I feel that intelligent, malevolent presence. I know what I saw. I don't care if people believe me or not. I'm not trying to convince anyone, but I know that there are things in those deep, dark woods that we don't understand. Things that are ancient and hungry. I was lucky. My dad's flashlight saved my life. But I know that thing is still out there, and I never, ever go into the woods after dark anymore. I don't even like being in the country. The silence of the night is no longer peaceful to me. It's a warning. Our next story comes from a truck driver named Mark. He says this happened a few years back on a long haul through the more remote parts of Nevada. He writes, "I've been driving a big rig for the better part of 2 decades. I've seen a lot of strange things on the road, especially at night. UFOs, ghost lights, people who look like they stepped out of a different century walking on the shoulder. You drive enough miles. You see stuff. Most of it, you just shake your head and keep rolling. You tell yourself it's the fatigue, the endless white lines, your mind playing tricks on you. But this one was different. This one, I can't shake. I was on a run from Salt Lake City to Reno. It's a long, lonely stretch of highway, especially once you get into the heart of Nevada. It's called the loneliest road in America for a reason. Miles and miles of nothing but sagebrush and desert and mountains in the far distance. It was about 2 in the morning. The road was dead empty. I hadn't seen another pair of headlights in over an hour. The only light was from my own rig, cutting a tunnel through the absolute blackness. The sky was clear, full of stars. No moon. I was feeling good, actually. Had my coffee, had my music playing low. Just eating up the miles. That's when I saw something on the side of the road, up ahead. At first, I thought it was a deer or a coyote, caught in my high beams. It was just a shape, maybe 100 yards out. But as I got closer, I realized it was too big to be a coyote. And it wasn't shaped like a deer. It was standing still, right on the edge of the pavement. I slowed down a little, just to be safe. Last thing you want is to hit something that big. As I got within 50 yards, my headlights lit it up fully, and my brain just short-circuited. It didn't make any sense. It was standing on 2 legs. It was tall and skinny, but it was hunched over, like it was looking at something on the ground. It was covered in what looked like dark, shaggy hair or fur. My first thought was, it's a guy in a ghillie suit. A hunter, maybe? But what would a hunter be doing out here in the middle of the night, standing on the highway? It made no sense. Then it stood up. It straightened up to its full height, and I swear to you, it was at least 7 feet tall, maybe taller. It was unnaturally thin for its height, all long limbs and sharp angles, and it turned its head to look at my truck. That's when the fear hit me, because it wasn't a man. The head was long and narrow, like a dog's head, or a wolf's. It had a long snout. I could see the glint of my headlights reflecting off its eyes. They were big and dark. It just stood there, watching me approach. It showed no fear. It just watched. I was doing maybe 40 miles an hour by this point. My hands were clenched on the steering wheel. My heart was hammering against my ribs. I thought about hitting the horn, trying to scare it off the road, but I was too scared to move. I just kept driving, my eyes locked on this thing. As I passed it, it didn't move. It just turned its head, following my truck as I went by. I looked in my side mirror. It was still standing there, a tall, dark, impossible shape in my receding headlights. Then it stepped out onto the road, right into the middle of my lane, and it started to run. It was running after me. I stomped on the accelerator. My engine roared, and the truck started to pick up speed. 45, 50, 55. I looked in my mirror again. It was still there, and it was keeping up. It was running on those two long dog-like legs, its arms pumping at its sides. Its movements were jerky, unnatural, but it was fast, unbelievably fast. It was pacing my truck. I pushed the engine harder. 60 miles an hour, 65. The thing was still there, running effortlessly in my rearview mirror. It was like a machine. It wasn't getting tired. It was just running. The terror I felt was something I can't even describe. This was not happening. This was a dream, a hallucination. But the rumble of the engine under my feet was real. The shaking of the wheel in my hands was real. And the thing in my mirror was real. It started to gain on me, slowly at first. Then it put on a burst of speed. It closed the distance in seconds. It was right behind my trailer. I couldn't see it directly anymore. It was too close. Then I heard a loud bang from the back of the truck. It had hit the trailer. My whole rig shuddered. Another bang, harder this time. It was attacking my truck. While we were moving at over 60 miles an hour, I was screaming. I don't know what I was screaming. Just wordless sounds of panic. I kept my foot pressed to the floor. 70 miles an hour. The truck was rattling, protesting. I heard a scraping sound, a horrible, metallic screech. I risked a glance in my passenger side mirror. And there it was. It was running alongside the trailer. Its head was level with the top of my tires. Its long, clawed hand was reaching out, scraping along the metal side of the trailer, leaving deep gouges. I could see its face clearly in the glow of my running lights. The fur was dark and greasy. The snout was long, the lips pulled back in a silent snarl, showing rows of sharp yellow teeth. But the eyes were what got me. They were not animal eyes. They were intelligent. They were looking right at me, at the cab. It knew I was in there. It was trying to get to me. It started to move forward along the length of the trailer. It was going to try and get to the cab. I swerved the truck, trying to knock it off balance. The trailer fishtailed, but the thing was agile. It just adjusted its stride, never breaking its pace. It was getting closer to the gap between the trailer and my cab. I knew if it got there, I was dead. It could tear the door off. It could smash the window. I had nothing to defend myself with, just a tire iron under my seat. What good would that do? I had one last desperate idea. Up ahead, I could see a gentle curve in the road. It wasn't much, but it might be enough. As I entered the curve, I yanked the wheel hard to the right, then immediately back to the left. It's a move they teach you not to do. It's how you jackknife a rig. The trailer swung out wide. I heard a sickening thud and a screech of metal. I looked in the mirror. The thing was gone. I had hit it with the back corner of the trailer. I kept my foot down. I didn't slow down. I didn't look back. I drove for another 10 miles at top speed, my eyes glued to my mirrors, expecting to see that impossible shape start running again. But there was nothing, just the empty road behind me. Finally, I saw the lights of a truck stop up ahead. It was like seeing the gates of heaven. I pulled in, my hands shaking so badly I could barely steer. I parked in the brightest part of the lot, right under a big light pole. I killed the engine and just sat there in the sudden silence. I was drenched in sweat. I couldn't stop shaking. After a few minutes, I got out of the cab on wobbly legs. I had to see the damage. I had to see if it was real. I walked to the back of the trailer. My flashlight beam shook in my hand. On the side of the trailer, there were long, deep scratches in the paint and the metal. 4 parallel gouges, running for about 10 feet. They were deep, like they'd been made by steel claws. At the very back corner of the trailer, there was a huge dent, and smeared in the dent there was something dark. It was blood, and there were coarse, dark hairs stuck in the mangled metal. It was real. It had all been real. I felt like I was going to be sick. I stumbled back to my cab, locked the doors, and just sat there until the sun came up. I didn't sleep. I just watched the parking lot, my eyes burning. When the sun was fully up, I called my dispatcher. I told him I hit a deer, a very, very big deer. I told him it damaged the trailer and I needed to get it looked at. What else could I say? Who would believe the truth? They sent me to a repair shop in Reno. The mechanic looked at the scratches. "What the hell did you hit?" he asked. "A deer," I said. He just grunted. "Must have been wearing armor." I never drove that route again. I told my company I wouldn't. I'll take the long way around now. I don't care how many hours it adds. I've tried to forget it. I've tried to tell myself it was a dream. But sometimes, when I'm driving at night on a lonely road, I see a shape in the darkness on the shoulder, and my blood runs cold. I put my foot to the floor, and I don't look in the mirror. I don't want to see it if it's running after me. I know what I saw out there in the desert. It wasn't an animal. It was something else, something that shouldn't exist, and it was fast enough to catch a freight liner. Think about that for a minute. Whatever you do, if you're ever on that lonely road in Nevada at night, don't stop. Don't even slow down. Just keep driving. This next account comes to us from a woman who asks to be called Sarah. This took place when she was a teenager, living on her family's farm in rural Ohio. She writes, "My childhood was pretty idyllic, I guess. We lived on a small farm, about 100 acres, surrounded by cornfields and patches of woods. It was quiet, and, for the most part, it was safe. The biggest dangers we worried about were coyotes getting into the chicken coop or a deer running in front of the car. I was 16 when this happened. I had a younger brother, Tim, who was 12. Our farmhouse was old, one of those classic 2-story white houses with a big wraparound porch. My bedroom was on the 2nd floor at the back of the house. My window looked out over our backyard, a small patch of woods, and then the endless cornfields. It was late summer, August. The corn was tall and dense, over 8 feet high. At night, when the wind blew, it sounded like an ocean. The nights were hot and sticky, and we didn't have air conditioning back then. So I always slept with my window wide open. I'd done it my whole life. The sounds of the night, the crickets, the frogs, the occasional hoot of an owl, were like a lullaby to me. One night I was woken up by our dog. His name was Buster, a big, goofy golden retriever who was afraid of thunderstorms and nothing else. He was outside, in his dog run next to the house, and he was going absolutely crazy. He wasn't just barking. He was screaming. It was a terrified panic sound I had never heard him make before. I sat up in bed, my heart pounding. Something was wrong. I crept out of bed and went to my open window. I leaned out, looking down at the dog run. There was a bright security light on a pole by the barn. So the backyard was lit up pretty well. I could see Buster. He was at the far end of his run, the end closest to the woods. He was cowering, pressed against the chain-link fence, whining and barking at something in the darkness just beyond the light's reach. His tail was tucked so far between his legs it was practically touching his stomach. I tried to see what he was barking at. I stared into the tree line at the edge of the cornfield. The shadows were deep there. I couldn't see anything, but I could feel it. That same feeling everyone describes. The feeling of being watched by something you can't see. My dad came out onto the back porch. The screen door slammed behind him. "Buster, quiet down!" he yelled. Buster didn't even look at him. He just kept staring into the darkness, letting out these terrified yelps. My dad stood there for a minute, then sighed and went back inside. He probably figured it was just a raccoon or a possum. I stayed at the window, watching. After a few minutes, Buster stopped barking. He just stood there, trembling, whining low in his throat. Then he turned and bolted into his doghouse. He wouldn't come out. That scared me more than the barking. Buster loved being outside. Something had terrified him into hiding. I still couldn't see anything. But then I heard a sound. It came from the edge of the cornfield. It was a rustling sound, but it wasn't the wind. The air was dead still. This was something moving through the dry corn stalks. Something big. It was moving slowly, deliberately, along the edge of the field, just outside the light. I held my breath, listening. It was moving parallel to the house. Then it stopped. It stopped directly behind the small patch of woods that separated our yard from the cornfield. I couldn't see it, but I knew it was there. It felt like it was looking at the house, at my window. I backed away from the window slowly, my heart in my throat. I closed it and locked it. I pulled the curtain shut. I climbed back into bed and pulled the covers up to my chin, even though it was hot. I lay there for hours, listening. I didn't hear anything else, but I couldn't sleep. The next morning, Buster was still in his doghouse. My dad had to physically drag him out to get him to eat. He wasn't the same dog. He was jumpy and nervous. He wouldn't go near the back of his run. I didn't tell my parents what I had heard. I knew they'd say it was just my imagination. A few nights later, it happened again. I was woken up by a sound, not the dog this time, a sound from outside my window, a scratching sound. It was coming from the side of the house, right below my window. It sounded like someone was dragging their fingernails down the wooden siding. I froze in my bed, listening. Scrape, scrape, scrape. Then it stopped. I waited, my body rigid with fear. Then I heard a soft thump against the wall. And another. It sounded like something was trying to climb the house. Our house had a trellis for roses that went up the wall, right next to my window. I heard the wooden trellis creak under a heavy weight. It was coming up. It was climbing towards my window. I was too scared to move, too scared to make a sound. I just lay there, staring at the curtains, expecting to see a hand or something worse come through at any moment. The creaking got louder, closer. It was right outside my window now. I could hear breathing, a low, guttural, raspy sound, and I could smell it, a rank, gamey smell, like old meat and damp earth. It filled my room, even with the window closed. I squeezed my eyes shut. I prayed for it to go away. Then I heard a tapping on the glass. Tap, 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 slow and deliberate. It was tapping on my window pane. It knew I was in there. I let out a little whimper. I couldn't help it. The tapping stopped. There was a low growl from right outside the window. It was a sound of frustration, of anger. Then there was a loud crash from downstairs, the sound of breaking glass. My dad yelled. "Who's there?" I heard my mom scream. The sound of whatever was outside my window was gone. I heard a heavy thud in the yard, like something had jumped down from a great height. I jumped out of bed and ran out of my room. My dad was at the bottom of the stairs with a baseball bat. "Stay up there, Sarah!" he shouted. My little brother Tim was peeking out of his room, his eyes wide with fear. I went to him and pulled him back into his room. We huddled together on his bed, listening. My dad was shouting, "I've called the police! Get out of my house!" We heard footsteps running through the house. Then the back door slammed open, and then silence. After a few minutes, my dad called up that it was all clear. We went downstairs. The kitchen window, the one over the sink, was shattered. There was glass all over the floor. The back door was wide open, the screen door torn off its hinges. The police came, 2 deputies. They took our statement. My dad told them he thought it was a burglar. He said he heard something, came downstairs, and the burglar ran out the back. They looked around the yard with their flashlights. They found footprints in my mom's flower bed under the broken kitchen window. They were huge. They were bare. And they weren't human. They were long and narrow, with claw marks in the dirt. One of the deputies just stared at them. "What in the world made these?" he whispered. The other deputy just shook his head. "Big dog, maybe, or a bear." But we didn't have bears in our part of Ohio, and no dog I've ever seen had feet like that. They also found the scratches on the side of the house, leading up to my window. And the trellis was broken, splintered in several places. They wrote it all down in their report, but you could tell they didn't know what to make of it. They told us to keep our doors and windows locked. They left. We never heard from them again. That night, no one slept. We all stayed in the living room together. My dad sat in his armchair with his shotgun across his lap. The next day, he went out and bought new, heavy-duty locks for all the doors and windows. He took down the trellis. He reinforced the dog run with thicker wire. We didn't talk about what happened. It was like if we didn't say it out loud, it wasn't real. But it was real. I know what was climbing up to my window. I know what was breathing on the other side of that glass. A few weeks later, after the corn was harvested, some neighbors found strange tracks in their fields, and some livestock went missing. A couple of sheep, a calf. People blamed coyotes, but what they found of the remains? It wasn't the work of coyotes. The animals were torn apart. We lived in that house for 5 more years before my parents sold the farm and we moved into town. My mom said it was because the farm was too much work. But I know the real reason. She was scared. We were all scared. That house never felt safe again. The night was never peaceful again. Even now, all these years later, I live in a city on the 10th floor of an apartment building, and I still sleep with my windows locked. I can still hear that tapping on the glass. I can still smell that awful smell. My brother Tim, he won't talk about it at all. If I bring it up, he just shuts down. He says he doesn't remember it clearly, but I think he does. I think he's just buried it. I can't. It's a part of me now. a constant reminder that the world is not as safe as you think it is, and that sometimes the things from nightmares are real, and they know which window is yours. Our final story for this evening comes from a man named David. He writes that he and his cousin had an experience while deer hunting in the woods of northern Wisconsin, an experience that changed both of their lives forever. He writes, "My cousin Jason and I were inseparable growing up. We were born only a few months apart, and we did everything together. Our favorite thing to do was hunt and fish. Our families had a small, rustic hunting cabin deep in the Chequamegon-Nicolet National Forest. It was our paradise. We spent countless weekends and summers up there. By the time we were in our late teens, we knew those woods like the back of our hands. This happened during deer season, the week of Thanksgiving. We were both 18. We had driven up to the cabin by ourselves for the first time. It was a rite of passage for us. The cabin was very isolated, miles down a winding dirt road that was barely passable after a good rain. There was no electricity, no running water, just us, the woods, and the deer we were hoping to find. The first few days of the trip were perfect. The weather was cold and crisp. We saw plenty of deer, but we were holding out for a big buck. On the third day, we decided to hunt a part of the forest we hadn't explored much before. It was a few miles from the cabin, a thick area of old-growth pines and swampy lowlands. We set out before dawn, bundled up in our hunting gear. We both had our .30-06 rifles. We walked for a couple of hours, moving slowly and quietly, watching for any sign of movement. The woods were quiet that morning, too quiet. Normally, you'd hear squirrels, birds, the usual forest chatter. But there was nothing, just an eerie, dead silence. Even the wind seemed to be holding its breath. Jason and I looked at each other. We both felt it. Something was off. "This is weird," Jason whispered. "Yeah," I agreed. "It's like the whole forest is hiding." We kept going, but we were more on edge now. We came to a small clearing. In the middle of the clearing was a deer, or what was left of one. It had been torn to shreds. It wasn't a clean kill like a wolf or a bear would make. It was messy. The animal was ripped apart, its entrails strewn across the frosty ground. There were huge chunks of meat torn from its body. "What the hell did this?" Jason said, his voice low. I shook my head. "I've never seen a wolf do this, or a bear." We looked for tracks. The ground was hard and frozen, but we found a few prints in a patch of soft mud near the carcass. They were huge. They were like a canine track, but way too big. And they were deep, like whatever made them was incredibly heavy. A sense of dread started to creep over me. "Maybe we should head back," I said. Jason nodded, his face pale. "Good idea." We turned and started walking back the way we came. We didn't talk. We just walked, our rifles held at the ready. The silence of the woods felt heavy now, threatening. After about 10 minutes, I heard a sound behind us. A twig snapping. I stopped. Jason stopped too. We stood perfectly still, listening. Nothing. "Probably just a squirrel," Jason said, but his voice lacked conviction. We started walking again, faster this time. Then we heard it again. This time it was closer. A definite footstep in the dry leaves. Something was following us. We started to jog. The footsteps behind us quickened their pace. It wasn't trying to be stealthy anymore. We could hear it crashing through the underbrush, keeping pace with us. It sounded big, heavy. "Run," I said. And we ran. We sprinted through the trees, branches whipping at our faces. The thing behind us was running too. We could hear its heavy footfalls getting closer and closer. I could hear it breathing, a harsh, guttural, panting sound. I didn't dare look back. I just focused on the trees in front of me, on not falling. We ran until our lungs were on fire. We finally broke out of the trees and onto the dirt road that led to our cabin. The cabin was still a good half a mile away. We were out in the open now. We risked a look behind us. At the edge of the woods, about 100 yards back, something was standing there. It was partially hidden by the trunk of a large pine tree, but we could see it. It was tall, dark, and massive. It was just standing there, watching us. We couldn't make out any details from that distance. It was just a horrifying silhouette. "What is that?" Jason breathed. "I don't know," I said. "Let's go." We started running down the road towards the cabin. The thing at the edge of the woods didn't move. It just watched us. We got to the cabin, fumbled with the key, and scrambled inside. We slammed the heavy wooden door and threw the bolt. We ran to the windows, peering out. The thing was gone. The edge of the woods was empty. "Did you see it?" I asked Jason. He was leaning against the wall, trying to catch his breath. "I saw something," he said. "Something big." We were both shaken, badly. We decided to pack up and leave. The hunting trip was over. We started throwing our gear into our bags. We were just about ready to go when we heard a sound from outside. A long, mournful howl. But it wasn't a wolf. It was deeper, louder. It was a sound that made the hair on your arms stand up. It was close, too close. We froze, looking at each other. Then something hit the side of the cabin, a heavy, solid thud. It sounded like someone had thrown a huge rock against the wall. "It's here," Jason whispered. We grabbed our rifles. We didn't know what else to do. We stood in the middle of the small cabin, back to back, watching the windows. The sun was starting to go down. The light was fading fast. We heard footsteps circling the cabin. Slow, heavy steps, the same steps we had heard in the woods. It was walking on 2 feet. It walked all the way around the cabin, and then it stopped. It stopped right in front of the door. We heard a sniffing sound, a loud, wet sniffing at the crack under the door. It knew we were inside. It let out a low growl that vibrated through the floor. Jason raised his rifle, pointing it at the door. "What do we do?" he asked, his voice shaking. "I don't know," I said. Then it started pushing on the door. Not hitting it, just a steady, immense pressure. The thick wooden door started to creak and groan. The bolt was straining. "It's going to break it down," I said. "We have to shoot it," Jason said. "Through the door." It was a crazy idea, but what choice did we have? "On 3, I said. "Aim for the middle." 1, 2. Before I could say 3, the thing let out a deafening roar of fury, and the pressure on the door stopped. We heard it take a few steps back. Then there was a crash as it threw itself against the wall of the cabin, right next to the door. The whole cabin shook violently. Things fell off the shelves. It hit the wall again and again. It was trying to break through the wall itself. The log walls were thick, but I didn't know how much they could take. "The window!" I yelled. There was a small window on the back wall of the cabin. It was our only other way out. We ran to it. I looked out. It was almost dark now. I could see our truck, parked about 30 yards away. It looked like it was a million miles away. "We have to make a run for the truck," I said. As the thing hit the wall again, we made our move. Jason smashed the window with the butt of his rifle. He climbed out. I handed him our rifles and then climbed out after him. We landed on the cold ground. The thing heard us. The pounding on the wall stopped. We heard a furious snarl from the front of the cabin. We didn't wait to see it. We just ran. We sprinted towards the truck, our boots slipping in the mud. We were halfway there when it came around the side of the cabin. It was silhouetted against the last dying light in the sky. It was a nightmare. It was impossibly tall and broad. It was covered in dark fur. It had a wolf's head with pointed ears and a long snout. It saw us. It let out that same terrifying roar we heard at the door, and it charged. It moved with a speed that defied its size. It covered the ground in huge, loping strides. Jason reached the truck first. He fumbled with the door handle. "It's locked!" he screamed. I had the keys. I was still 10 feet away. The creature was almost on top of us. I threw the keys to Jason. "Catch!" He fumbled them, dropped them. "No!" he yelled, dropping to his knees to find them in the dark. The creature was 5 feet away. It was reaching for him. I did the only thing I could think of. I raised my rifle and fired. I didn't aim. I just pointed and pulled the trigger. The shot was deafening in the quiet evening. The bullet hit the creature in the chest. It staggered back, roaring in pain and rage. It looked at me. The hatred in its eyes was a physical thing. Jason had found the keys. He unlocked the door and scrambled into the driver's seat. I fired again. The creature swiped at me with a massive clawed hand. I threw myself backwards, falling into the mud. The claws missed my face by inches. Jason had the engine started. "Get in!" he screamed. I scrambled to my feet and dove into the passenger side of the truck. Jason stomped on the gas. The tires spun in the mud for a second, then caught. The truck lurched forward. As we pulled away, the creature threw itself at the side of the truck. Its weight rocked the vehicle. I saw its face in the window, snarling, its yellow fangs bared. It tried to hold on, its claws screeching against the metal. But the truck was picking up speed. It lost its grip and fell away. Jason didn't slow down. He flew down that dirt road, the truck bouncing and sliding. I looked back. The creature was standing in the middle of the road, watching us go. It was a dark, towering shape in our taillights. Then it raised its head to the sky and let out a howl of pure, unadulterated fury, a sound that followed us all the way back to the paved road. We didn't stop driving until we were home, a 4-hour drive. We didn't say a word the entire time. We just drove. When we got back, our parents knew something was wrong. We were covered in mud, pale as ghosts. We tried to tell them what happened. They didn't believe us. They said we must have seen a bear and gotten spooked. "A 30-06 will take down any bear," my uncle said. But we knew what we saw, and we knew that 2 shots from a 30-06 had done little more than make it angry. The next day, my dad and my uncle drove up to the cabin to get our gear. They found the cabin trashed. The wall was partially caved in. They found my rifle shell casings on the ground. They found the deep claw marks on the side of my cousin's truck, and they found blood on the ground where I had shot it. But no body, no blood trail, just a few drops in the mud, and then nothing. They never said they believed us. But they sold the cabin that next year. Jason and I, we were never the same after that. Something broke between us that night. We couldn't look at each other without seeing the fear in our own eyes. We couldn't talk about it. Every time I tried, he would shut me down. "We saw a bear, David," he'd say. "That's all. We just saw a bear." But I know he knows the truth. We don't hunt anymore. We barely even talk. The thing we shared in those woods was too terrible. It took our friendship, and it took our love for the outdoors. I still have nightmares about it. I see its eyes. I hear its roar, and I know with a certainty that chills me to my soul that it's still out there in those deep, dark woods, waiting. And I know that we were just two dumb kids who trespassed in a place we didn't belong. And we were lucky to get out alive. And with that, we have come to the end of our stories for tonight. A genuine thank you to Mark, to Sarah, to David, and to the first gentleman who wished to remain anonymous for trusting me with your experiences. To share something so personal, so terrifying, takes a tremendous amount of courage. And I and everyone listening, we appreciate it. Thank you to everyone who took the time to listen. If these stories resonated with you, please consider liking the video and sharing it with someone who might appreciate it. If you are new here, think about subscribing. We would be glad to have you join our community. I read the comments on every video, and I truly appreciate the conversations that happen there. The support and respect you all show for one another and for the people sharing their stories is incredible. So, thank you for that. As always, take care of yourselves. Take care of each other. Watch over your loved ones. Keep your head on a swivel and stay safe out there. Until next time, my friends, good night.